Hi and welcome to Chess Bootcamp. My name is Ben Hunt. I'm a intermediate chess player. I'm not a chess master by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm here to try and help you to improve your chess. And to begin with, the first goal should be to break through the 1000 rating point barrier. Now, what I've found when I've been studying chess, I've been playing chess casually more or less my whole life, and in the last couple of years I've started to take it a bit more seriously and play most days. And what I have found to be the most useful in terms of improving my game has been when I have followed real games and listened to the player's thought process as they've played through those games. And the other interesting thing is that I've found that when I have been watching grandmasters play, or IMs or whatever, I don't necessarily find that as helpful. And also there's so much out there in terms of strategy and lessons and example games on so many different channels. But the very, very best games that you see out there, the most beautiful, the most brilliant, the most convoluted and complex games, I don't think that's where you need to be looking to get over the 1000 point barrier. Because really, when you are sub 1000, I find that games tend to get decided not by brilliance or tactics or knowing your opening theory, but by simply avoiding the silly blunders and the silly mistakes and letting pieces be captured for no reason, stuff like that. So that's why I've created Chess Bootcamp. We're going to start with some very, very simple basic rules. You literally only have 3 rules to remember with this system, okay? We're not going to be going into a load of opening theory. We're not going to be going into a load of endgame strategy stuff. What we're going to be working on is those absolute fundamentals. I want to help you to understand why there are all these principles and ideas in chess, so that you can understand the game and figure this stuff out for yourself. So we're going to be working on the most fundamental principles of the game. Okay, so let's dive in to the 3 rules, and then after that we'll look at how they apply, and then subsequently I'm just going to show you a bunch of games, and we're going to work through those games. Some of them will be mine, some of them will be other people's. There'll be people rated 400, 500, 600, and we're going to apply the 3 rules to those games so that you can understand how you can use those 3 rules to improve your own chess and to break through that 1000 rating point barrier. Okay, so let's work through the rules very quickly. Only 3 things to remember. Rule number 1 is take your time. I cannot stress this enough. I fall foul of this a lot, and I think a lot of players below 2000 do. Taking your time. The most fundamental thing that I can possibly tell you at this point is, if you are playing bullet or blitz chess online, stop. Stop doing that. Why? Because playing chess, and playing chess well, playing chess better, is about being able to look at the board and figuring out within the limits of your ability or experience what is the best move for you to play right now on your turn. It's as simple as that, okay? And if you are only giving yourself a few seconds, then you aren't going to have time to look at the board unless you're a Magnus Carlsen, unless you're a GM, right? You're not going to be able to look at the board and know the best move straight away, unless you've been playing chess for years and years and years and studying and practicing for hours and hours a day. It's just not possible. So what you need to be working on is developing your ability to consider everything that's going on the board, all the possible candidate moves that you have, all your options, and then to figure out for yourself which you think is the best move. And that takes time. So you have to use time. So my advice is, if you're playing bullet or blitz, stop it. The shortest time control you should be working with is the 15-10. That's 15 minutes plus 10 seconds for each move made. Okay, so you want to be playing rapid games. If not longer, you can play daily games if you choose as well. But at a minimum, I would say rapid 15-10 is the time control that you need to be working with. And the reason is because it gives you that time. Okay, so let me give you just a few little tips for how to take your time. Number one, of course, don't play bullet or blitz. Number two, when it's your turn, do not ever simply execute the first move that you see, especially if it looks tempting, especially if you think that, oh, my opponent's blundered a piece, I can just take that, right? Don't ever do that, because you might just find yourself, something comes in, you're checkmated, the game is over, you've lost, right? Take your time. So, breathe, right? One thing I've tried in the past is putting a timer on my phone to say minimum 30 seconds. Okay, that didn't really work out well for me. But one thing that I do is I'll look at the time that I have left in the game, and I will say to myself, either in my head or sometimes out loud, I have 13 minutes. I have 10 minutes. So just remind yourself, that is your time. If your opponent is rushing their moves, great. Let them rush their moves. That's how they're going to lose. At this level, sub 1000, you can win a bunch of games just by waiting. Play quiet moves if you need to, right? Wait until your opponent makes a mistake. Chess games are so often decided by who makes that final mistake. Okay. Another thing that I would recommend is when you think you know what move you should be making, let's assume you're playing online, grab the mouse, pick up the piece, move it over the square where you think you want to drop it, and then pause. Do a sanity check. Am I doing anything stupid with this move? If I've put that piece there, can something just take it? Have I just undefended something important? Right? What will change when I make this move? Take a couple of breaths. Look at the board. What's going to change? And if you're still happy, drop the piece where you want to drop it and move on with the game. Okay? Taking your time, I believe, is one of the most fundamental things. I go on to chess.com when I'm looking at players' previous games. So many players under 1000. I'll look at their previous games and they're all blitz, 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 or bullet, 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 all the way down. And that is not the way to improve. First, work on the quality of your play. Work on the breadth of how you can look at the whole board. Look at the depth. Can I consider all my options and then figure out for myself which is the best one? Okay? And there's only one way to practice that, and that's by taking time. Let's move on. The second rule, this is absolutely critical, king safety. If your king gets checkmated, you lose the game. Doesn't matter if you are 12 points up in the game in terms of material. If your king gets checkmated, the game is over and you've lost. Likewise, if you can checkmate the enemy's king, the game is over and you win. So always, always, always bear in mind king safety. Even when your opponent has placed a piece in front of you and you think, I can take that. The second thing you must always do, so first thing is take your time. I'm not going to let you rush me into any moves, right? Okay. Second, is my king safe? Could I make my king more safe? Could I move a piece to defend it? Is there something undefended? Could I castle and get my king over to the corner of the board, for example? Okay. Always think king safety, because if your king isn't safe, then nothing else could matter in the game. Right? Always think king safety. That's the second thing. Right? Take your time. Make sure your king is safe. If you can attack their king, great. Now let's move on to rule 3. This is where things get fun. Controlling the board. And this really is apart from taking your time and apart from making sure your king is safe so you don't lose the game, controlling the board at this level is really the only thing you need to be thinking about. So what do we mean by controlling the board? Well, there's 64 squares on a chessboard, right? You need to be thinking, how many of those squares can my pieces reach? How many of those squares could they land on in the next turn if I choose, right? And we're going to look at this. But so many of the tactical ideas and the strategic and structural ideas in chess, it all comes back to this. It all comes back to controlling the board. Why is it so important? Well, let's say the more squares that your pieces can move to, right? The more squares that they could jump on, the more options you have. And the flip side is that the fewer squares that your opponent can move to, the fewer options they have. Now, the more options that you have in a chess game, the more ideas you've got, the more possibilities you've got, the more different attacks you can find, the more different escapes you have. Okay? So controlling the board means you want to control as many squares as you can, and you want to reduce the number of squares that your opponent controls. So what we're going to do next is we're going to jump over to a chessboard and we're going to look at, in practice, in visually, what controlling the board means. And then after this, we're going to dive into real chess games and we're going to apply our 3 principles. Take your time, king safety, control the board. That's all you need to know. Okay, so I've jumped over to the analysis board on chess.com. You can do this anytime you want. I'm not even logged in. And we're going to just look at controlling the board. Okay, this is the starting position in any chess game. Obviously, white gets to move first. So let's just start by thinking, how many squares can the white pieces move to? And we're not going to be thinking about squares that are already occupied by a white piece right now. Okay, and these are the ones. Okay, it's the entire third rank from A3 all the way across to H3. Some of these, so A3 is controlled by the pawn on B2 and the knight on B1. B3 is controlled by the pawn on A2 and the pawn on C2, etc. right across here. So some of them, C3 is controlled by 2 pawns and the knight on B1 as well. So C3 is currently targeted by 3 pieces. All pretty simple so far. And likewise for black, it would be, the 6th rank is controlled by black. Now, the most popular starting move in chess is pawn to E4. So let's play that. Now, why is this the most popular starting move in chess? Okay, it's because of controlling the board. Very simple. So, as previously, currently all of this third rank is still protected or controlled by the pawns on the 2nd rank. Okay, each one is still controlled by a pawn. But in addition, because we've moved our pawn forwards from E2 to E4, it means that we're also controlling this square and we're also controlling this square, D5 and F5. But what's more, because we've moved our pawn from E2, so it's now cleared, vacated the E2 square, where it was blocking in white's queen and the light squared bishop, we also now have other squares that are now controlled by those 2 pieces. So we've got the E2 square. D3 is covered again by the light squared bishop. We've also got C4. We've also got B5. And also, in theory, A6 there. And the queen, likewise, is looking at the G4 square, right? And the H5 square. So just look now how many extra squares on the board, just by making that one pawn move, are controlled by the white pieces. And this is what we mean. Right, so now, if, for example, black decides to move B5 for some reason, you can see the white line on here has suddenly gone up to plus 2.3. That means that the computer thinks that this is a very bad move. Why is it a bad move? because white can suddenly come out with his light square bishop and capture that pawn. Okay. Now we all know that in chess you want to keep your own pieces and you want to capture your enemy's pieces, right? But why? Why do we want to keep our own pieces on the board and capture our enemy's pieces? That's not something that we ever tend to think about, but the reason is because of controlling the board, right? When you take your opponent's pieces off the board, they control fewer squares of the board, right? When you keep your pieces on the board, the better you can do that, the more squares of the board are under your control. And of course, the more pieces you've got, you could have, for example, multiple pieces controlling one square. Okay, so let's just look at another kind of couple of ideas. So here's one thing. Okay, we all know that it's a good idea to control the center of the board. Okay, why is it a good idea to control the center of the board? Okay, it's all about control. So let's look at this knight. Let's look at this guy, this knight on g1, right? Okay, there he is. It's showing you right now which squares that knight is controlling. Okay, it's controlling e2, f3, h3. The reason is because the knight controls up to 8 squares all around it, but because that knight is on the edge of the board, most of those squares that the knight could theoretically move to aren't on the board, right? They're actually off the board. But if I were to move my knight now to f3, okay, and let's say black just makes a move here, and I look at the knight again, okay, look at the pieces now that my knight can move to, right? It was previously just 3, okay, now we've got these ones, right? So there's 4 up ahead, and all of these, full complement of 8 squares are now controlled by that knight. Okay, and that's because my knight is in this central 4x4 area of the board. Okay, so that's why you want your pieces in the middle of the board, right? A pawn. So this pawn on h2 right now, okay, only controls 1 square, only controls g3, right? But a pawn that's in the middle of the board, like this one now on g4, controls 2 squares. Okay, it's not from the fact that it's in the middle or it's advanced, it's just from the fact that it's not one of the edges, it's not on the A file or the H file. Okay, this is all about controlling squares. So if you get the chance to capture a pawn, okay, generally we tend to say you want to take inwards, you want to take towards the center of the board. Why is that? Because when you move towards the center of the board, you control more squares. So let's say that black moved here. I have the option of moving my knight on G. I can either capture on H or I can capture on F. If I capture on H, then this pawn is only then controlling 1 square of the board. However, if I were to choose to capture on F, my pawn is controlling 2 squares of the board. Very simple. Okay. Now let's look at another example. We're going to look at, for example, when we've got an open file. So I'm just going to move some pieces around. I'm going to play some bad moves. This is absolutely fine. Okay. And look at my queen now. My queen is now looking at controlling all of these squares, right, all the way up the D file up to here. Okay. Now, if my bishop were to move out of the way, then I've got a semi-open file where my rook can go. Okay. And now my rook, because it isn't blocked off, right? So here, look at my rook in its starting position, right? There are only 2 squares, or really 3 squares, that it controls, all right? Because it's blocked off. So there's just another principle in chess. You don't want your pawns or pieces to be blocking your other pieces. Why not? Because it's about control of the board. It's all about control of the board. Okay? So if I move my rook from A1 to B1, okay, then I'm controlling there and there and there and there. Right? All these squares, I'm now controlling more squares because there is space in front of my rook. Okay? So that's really the principle. Think about whenever you make a move, think about, okay, am I now controlling more of the board? Am I controlling less of the board? Am I going to allow my opponent to control more of the board or less of the board? Okay? This, in addition to our first two rules, okay, rule number 1, take your time. Rule number 2, king safety. That's paramount. But then rule number 3, control the board. So much of everything else that you can possibly learn in chess is about that principle, controlling the board. So what we're going to do next is we're going to look at some real games. We're going to think about king safety. We're going to think about using your time, not rushing. And we're going to think about controlling the board. Enjoy.